Hi, everybody. I'm Robert Bartholomew. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak here today on Havana syndrome, an important subject that has been mired in controversy and misinformation. This allows me to update the scientific community on the latest with this condition as of March 2021. Let's look at basic facts in this case. Between 2016 and 2018, a mysterious illness affected dozens of US and Canadian diplomats and their families in Havana, Cuba. The symptoms included headaches, dizziness, nausea, fatigue, difficulty concentrating, memory loss, confusion, disorientation, trouble walking, insomnia, sensitivity to sound, ear pain and pressure, tinnitus, and brain abnormalities that included concussion-like symptoms. An eerie sound accompanied many of these incidents. Theories have ranged from sonic weapons to microwaves to pesticides. The Trump administration has blamed Cuba and the Russians. In December of 2020, the National Academy of Sciences issued a report on at least 35 Americans who were affected, concluding the most likely cause, microwave radiation. Their findings, though, were far from definitive. A recent CDC study reached no conclusion. UCLA neurologist Bob Ballo and I have examined this case and written a book called Havana Syndrome. We have concluded that the most plausible explanation by far is psychogenic illness. This diagnosis has been complicated by bad science, bad government, and bad journalism. There are three notable exceptions: BuzzFeed News, The Guardian, and ProPublica. Let's look at the case in a nutshell for mass psychogenic illness. When the Obama administration renewed relations with Cuba in 2015, there was tension among American diplomats in Havana because during the Cold War, after US agents tried to overthrow the government, Cuban agents retaliated by harassing US diplomats. A similar tit for tat has been going on in Washington, D.C. among Cuban diplomats. It's well known, it's what you could call part of the game, and it's mostly minor stuff, but it's constant background tension. A former diplomat who served in Havana says, Cuba is high stress. Before we go, it is drilled into our heads. There will be surveillance. There will be listening devices in your house, probably your car. Assume they are always watching. When looking at cases of mass psychogenic illness, context is king, and it's so important to understand this background context of constant anxiety on the part of the diplomats. The first Americans affected heard strange sounds in their homes at night in late November 2016. One developed headaches, hearing problems, and pain in one ear. He presented to the embassy clinic in late December. On the 30th of December, the symptoms were reported to the US ambassador to Cuba. When it was learned, two other diplomats had reported hearing similar noises and experienced similar vague symptoms over the previous 2 months. It was thought that the Cubans might be harassing the diplomats with some new device. That the first 4 people affected were CIA agents working in the same small station in Havana crystallized a belief that the incidents were some kind of harassment or monitoring effort by the Cubans. Rumors quickly spread that the Cubans might be targeting diplomats with a sonic weapon as embassy staff began to hear alarming stories about sonic attacks. Despite claims to the contrary that some staff in Cuba, some of the diplomats, did not know, embassy staff have told me that everybody knew. It had spread through the embassy staff like wildfire. The case count ballooned as staff in Cuba were living in a stressful, uncertain environment amid rumors of a mysterious sonic weapon. As one diplomat told us, they were afraid to even go to bed at night, fearful that they and their families might be attacked in their sleep. Those affected shared a common work environment and social network. Once the Trump administration had identified the illness cluster as a resumption of Cold War hostilities, new staff being deployed were told that they could be the next targets and were played attack recordings made by diplomats in Havana, priming them for attacks when they got there. Analysis of a key recording was later identified as the mating call of the Indies short-tailed cricket. At least 15 recordings made by US diplomats during attacks have been analyzed and shown to have been the mating calls of crickets or cicadas. It is conspicuous that only American and Canadian embassy staff and their families were affected. Counseling staff over the perceived threat created an expectation of illness in a new frame through which to interpret future sounds and symptoms. This is a classic setup for mass psychogenic illness. I see three basic layers here. One is the bulk of cases being individual and collective functional neurological disorders, with the key feature being mass psychogenic illness. Number two, common ailments that have been given a new label and reframed as Havana syndrome. Third, less common ailments that have been reframed as Havana syndrome. A big problem with this case has been the focus by the US government and others on exotic explanations. The social patterning of this outbreak was evident very early on, yet instead of searching for mundane causes, the US State Department focused on explanations like sonic weapons and microwaves. This case can be summed up in a single sentence, and it comes from an old medical adage, and it goes something like this. When you hear the sounds of hoofbeats in the night, first think horses, not zebras. The doctors at the State Department went for the most exotic hypothesis early on. They were going for unicorns when they should have stuck to the mundane. This case has been typified by bad science, and I want to give you some examples here. The 2018 Journal of the American Medical Association study, they noted that they had an impairment threshold that was defined as any test score under the 40th percentile of normal responses, meaning that 4 in 10 normal people would have classified as being pathological. It should have been closer to 5%. Neurologist Sergio Della Sella has called the Journal of the American Medical Association methodology the real mystery, and how such poor neuropsychology could have been passed by the expert reviewers at the Journal of the American Medical Association. The 2018 JAMA study had many other issues with it as well. The authors dismissed mass psychogenic illness as the patients were cooperative and showed no evidence of malingering. One author later told the JAMA Network that they had discounted it as there was no evidence the patients were, and I'm quoting now, in collusion together to make sure all of their symptoms match. This is crazy. I mean, it's absurd. It shows a stunning lack of understanding of the literature. How can 10 medical professionals sign their names to a study that got basic information wrong? Information that would be failed by a year 10 science teacher. And how did the JAMA reviewers ever pass this study? The answer may surprise you. They didn't pass it. Bob Barlow was asked to review the study as he created some of the tests that were used by the researchers. Bob Barlow rejected it and pointed out that there was incorrect information, among other things, about mass psychogenic illness, and that incorrect information was never corrected in the final study. Going on to the second JAMA study of 2019, they found brain anomalies. Look, here's all you need to know about this study. Buried in the limitations section, they admit that the anomalies were not so pronounced that they could not rule out the possibility that they were caused by individual variation. I'm going to say that again. They could not rule out the possibility that they were caused by individual variation because the anomalies were not so significant. What's more is that 12 of the patients had pre-existing histories of concussion compared to 0 in the healthy controls. This alone could explain the differences between the two groups. Yes, the brain scans did find anomalies, but these were not normal MRI scans. These scans were so advanced that their use is usually reserved only for scientific research and can only be interpreted with advanced computer models. These advanced computer programs have false positive rates of up to 70%. Lastly, the authors conflate brain changes with brain damage. The fumigation study, it's very inconclusive. The bottom line here is there's no neurotoxin in the world that only affects American and Canadian embassy staff and their families. One of the authors commented at the National Academy of Sciences meeting that it couldn't be mass hysteria because everyone was calm. One study member told Canadian Broadcasting that mass psychogenic illness played no part because, and I'm quoting, "I haven't found any evidence of psychiatric disorder. This is a very strong group." This shows that they don't know what they're talking about. Mass psychogenic illness is not a mental disorder. It does not target weak-minded people. It is a collective stress response occurring overwhelmingly in normal, healthy people. It is spread by a belief. That brings me to the National Academy of Sciences study. The NAS panel found evidence for the Frey effect. This is where pulsed microwave beams aimed at someone's head can produce clicking sounds. The NAS chair has said that if a Frey-like effect can be induced on the central nervous system tissue responsible for space and motion information processing, it likely would induce alterations in brain functioning. Ken Foster is a leading authority on the Frey effect. He is a professor of bioengineering at the University of Pennsylvania. He and a colleague were the first scientists to describe the mechanism involved in the Frey effect in 1974. He says it's absurd. It's just a totally incredible explanation for what happened to these diplomats. It's just not possible. The idea that someone could beam huge amounts of microwave energy at people and not have it be obvious defies credibility. Rick Tell, the former head of the Environmental Protection Agency's Electromagnetics Division, he spent decades working on standards for safe exposure to microwaves. Here's what he said. If a guy is standing in front of a high-powered radio antenna, and it's got to be high, really high, then he could experience his body getting warmer. But to cause brain tissue damage, you would have to impart enough energy to heat it up to the point where it's cooking. I don't know how you could do that, especially if you're trying to transmit through a wall. It's just not plausible. The NAS report has mixed politics with science. The panel said they could not rule out mass psychogenic illness, but they couldn't evaluate it as there was zero data to evaluate. Here's what they said. The committee received no epidemiological evidence about patterns of social contacts that would permit a determination about possible social contagion. They specifically noted that they were unaware of any index case in cases after that. Had the panel invited Professor Barlow and I to present, we would have told them there was compelling evidence on the social patterning of cases from our book. The NAS report was released in December of 2020. Our book was available on March 20th of 2020, nearly 9 months earlier. Here is a picture of me giving a copy of our book to a member of the Cuban panel in March 2020, which was reported in the international media. More than a year before the NAS report came out, I contacted the chief medical officer at the State Department, Mark Cohen. He commissioned the NAS panel. I told him we had concluded that Havana syndrome was mass psychogenic illness and that we had a forthcoming book. He never asked for a copy, and I did offer a copy to him. It was a surprise to Professor Barlow and myself that when the NAS report came out, there was no reference to our book. Just imagine, the only comprehensive study of this case is contained in a book that's published by a leading scientific publisher, Springer Scientific, and co-authored by an eminent neurologist who has created some of the tests that were being given to the affected diplomats to assess their condition, and who was a reviewer for the first JAMA study. And the panel is unaware of this information. 2 extensive reports by accomplished investigative journalists Tim Golden and Sebastian Rotella appeared in ProPublica in 2018 and 2019. They detailed the social patterning of the outbreak based on dozens of interviews and access to government documents in Cuba. Both reports were also absent from the NAS report. These are major publications, widely available, just like our book. This is negligence on the part of the State Department and the National Academy of Sciences. Professor Simon Wesley, a world authority on mass psychogenic illness, was removed from the NAS panel for publicly stating that based on the evidence at hand, mass psychogenic illness was the most likely explanation. Prior to March of 2020 and the Havana Syndrome Conference in Cuba, the FBI sent agents to the offices of some of the American scientists who planned to present, and they warned them not to go, telling them it would undermine their government's official position. In at least one instance, When a presenter indicated they still planned to speak, agents visited their superiors and tried to get their legal department to stop them. The Biden administration needs to investigate why this happened and to release all of the Freedom of Information Act documents in this case as soon as possible. To summarize, this case is littered with misinformation, bad science, shoddy journalism, and above all, politics mixing with science. What is more likely, that the diplomats were the target of a mysterious new weapon for which there is no concrete evidence and the use of which defies the laws of physics, or they were suffering from psychogenic symptoms generated by stress? Question, and this is speculation, why are so many people trying so hard to claim it's not psychogenic? I think the Trump administration tried to manipulate the NAS panel and block the release of the FOIA documents because I think they now realize that under their administration, they mistook the mating calls of crickets and cicadas for a sonic attack, and this is a major embarrassment for the Trump administration. Shakespeare once wrote, "Or in the night, imagining some fear, how easy is a bush, suppose it a bear." Perhaps this should be updated. How easy is the sound of a cricket or cicada mistaken for a sonic attack? For anyone wanting more detailed information on this, here is a bibliography of recent studies that I published mostly in mainstream peer-reviewed journals on Havana syndrome. Look, this case has been disturbing for myself and Professor Ballo as well. There is so much misinformation out there that's been perpetrated by the government, that's been perpetrated by other researchers, that's been perpetrated by the mass media. It's important to have scientific forums like this where we can present this information and cut through all of the misinformation that's out there. Look, I'm happy to answer any questions anyone might have to pose for me. And if you're wondering why I couldn't present in person, I would love to, or present it in real time. But unfortunately, at the time of my presentation, at the middle of the night here in New Zealand. Thank you, take care, and God bless.